Hey there guys, how's it going? So, let me just, for legal reasons and for peace of mind, let me just start this video by saying that I am not directly accusing anybody of anything with this video, okay? I'm not saying or even suggesting that this is entirely factual. I'm not saying that I have inside information, anything like that. I'm just pointing out I guess you could call it a conspiracy or a theory, which I noticed several years back, which was recently brought to my attention by somebody. Now, when Carl Froch fought Lucien Boutte back in 2012, there was a situation after the fight that got hushed up pretty quickly, and somebody quite recently posted a comment on one of my videos talking about Tony Bellew. Now, I was talking in several videos I've done about how I believe that the setup we have now in the UK with Sky Sports, with Eddie Hearn and whatnot, is so unbelievably corrupt that it's damn right disgraceful. I mean, you've got guys taking PEDs and not being tested. You know, you've got all sorts of underhand tactics, like with the referees and the judges. You know, guys being messed around before fights, and there's just a lot of inconsistencies. There's so much, you know, disingenuous behavior. And you see, somebody made a comment on one of my videos a couple of months ago telling me that when David Haye fought Tony Bellew, he claimed that apparently Tony Bellew's gloves were never checked in the changing rooms, and apparently there was no formal inspection done on Tony Bellew's gloves. And I don't know whether or not that's true. I've tried to find some footage of the glove inspection, because, you know, sometimes they show it. As of yet, I haven't been able to find any footage, but from what this guy said in the comments, it sort of reignited this old theory and this old thing I had in my head years ago about Carl Froch. So basically, when Carl Froch fought Lucien Boutte, now, going into that fight, he had come off a string of close fights, a string of fights where he had gone the distance, a string of fights which were all competitive, fights where he had shown, you know, sort of poor technique, poor balance. You know, he was never the most fluid fighter. You know, he was never had the best punching technique. You know, he was always heavy-handed. But if you look at any of his fights from a high British level to world level, he was a guy who tended to either grind out a victory or go the distance. And certainly all the fights he had in the Super 6, I mean, he never even came close to even hurting any of his opponents in the Super 6. I mean, you look at all his fights, they all went the distance. He never scored any knockdowns, never stunned an opponent, never really had an opponent hurt, to be honest. I mean, he did cut Mikkel Kessler, but that was a cut that had reopened from previous fights, so I don't really count that. But yeah, it was well established that going into that fight, Froch was not really a knockout puncher at world level. Then something happened. Now, he went into that Lucien Boutte fight, and I remember watching that fight live and just being absolutely astounded by the way that Lucien Boutte was reacting to punches, because I'd followed Lucien Boutte's career too, and I'd seen him in fights with heavy-handed guys like Sakio Bika and Glenn Johnson and whatnot, and some other guys, and Boutte always appeared to me to be a guy who had a pretty good chin and was pretty durable. I know he after the Froch fight, he sort of developed a reputation for being chinny and fragile, but that was not his reputation going into that fight, because he'd only been down, I believe it was against Andrade, where in the first fight, where he was just absolutely shattered, where he'd like punched himself out and he was so tired he couldn't stay on his feet in the last round and he got dropped. But other than that, you know, he'd fought guys like Edison Miranda and taken punches. Edison Miranda, who was a huge puncher. You know, he'd fought a lot of real, you know, heavy-handed guys. He fought Kabari Salem, another decent puncher, and never shown any chin problems. But he went into that Carl Froch fight, and it was like he just got overwhelmed so quickly. And Froch was so, you know, he was the same as always in that fight. He was sloppy. You know, he was, you know, throwing like backhanders, rabbit punches, you know, hitting with the wrists. You know, he never had great punching technique, Froch, and I think that was why he was never really able to utilize his power for the most part in his career. And Lucien Boutte, his face after the fight and his brain, like the way that he was behaving afterwards, it was as if he'd been in a car accident. I'm not even kidding. Like, I was just really, really shocked by what I was seeing. And then I noticed something else. Now, I used to live in Nottingham, so I followed Carl Froch's entire career from the beginning. So I've seen a lot of his fights live, followed his whole career. And what was interesting too is I had a friend who was in the crowd that night who was actually texting me during the fight. And when I noticed something that I noticed watching the fight online, and then when I rewatched it, there's something that Carl Froch did in this fight which he has never done before. Something that he has never, like, again, I followed his whole entire career, every single fight off memory that I can think of, and I went back and watched a bunch of them. I could not see him do this in any other fight, and that is, after the fight was over, during the post-fight interview, while all the cameras were around, while the crowd was leaving, everything, this, that, and the other, for the whole time, he left on his gloves. Now, in every other Carl Froch fight I've seen, he takes the gloves off as soon as the fight's over. No matter what happens in the fight, whether he knocks the guy out, whether he stops the guy, whether it wins by decision, whether he loses, he always takes the gloves off as soon as the fight's over, has them cut off. Now, my friend who was in the crowd that night, I won't give you his name because I don't think that's very nice of me to tell you who he is, but he's a friend of mine. He likes to stay for the whole like post-fight interview after fights, and he, you know, when everybody else is walking out, like, he's still there for the most part, seeing what's going on. I'm the same that way when I go to fights, particularly if I go to a world title fight. I always stay there until everything's all said and done, and then I leave. And he told me that while Carl Froch was walking back to the changing rooms after all the cameras were gone, after everything was done, he still had his gloves on, even walking back to the changing room with his entourage. And I found that extremely suspicious. I found it really weird. I went on Facebook and I actually spoke about it at the time to some people. And then I found out from a couple of forums, it just gets worse, that Lucien Boutte's trainer, Stéphane Larouche, apparently held a press conference about this. He apparently said that the gloves were not checked. That basically Eddie Hearn and Eddie Hearn's people who were running the show didn't allow him to properly inspect the gloves. So Carl Froch went into that fight. His gloves hadn't been looked at. They hadn't been inspected properly. He went into the ring, got the job done by knockout, an early knockout. I mean, Lucien Boutte's face was fucked up afterwards. It looked as if he'd been in a car accident. The guy had never been in that situation before in his entire career. He'd always shown a pretty good chin. Since that fight, Lucien Boutte has been just so fragile in fights. Like if you look at the Aledia Alvarez fight, even the Denis Grachev fight, like, he's just so like timid in the ring now. He's never been the same since. To me, it reeks of corruption. I again, I'm not criticizing or I'm not accusing anybody directly here. But if Eddie Hearn has a particular setup right now where he's having his fighters come into the ring with some kind of loaded gloves or illegally wrapped hands, then it might explain why fighters like Tony Bellew, Anthony Joshua, and all these other guys are starching their opponents. Like Tony Bellew, I mean, he's dropping guys. This is a guy that at light heavyweight couldn't even put down Nathan Cleverly. You know, he couldn't even put down Oval McKenzie. He couldn't even phase people like Adonis Stevenson and all these other guys at light heavyweight he fought. Isaac Chalemba, he was known for going the distance at a high level, basically. At high domestic level, Tony Bellew was always a guy that went the distance. And you look at Carl Froch, again, same situation, always went the distance at high level. Never was able to really utilize his punching technique. And now these guys are knocking people the fuck out. Like, he knocked George Groves spark out. Tony Bellew knocked Alunga Makabu spark out. He knocked BJ Flores out. These are all big guys, okay? These are all tough, durable guys. So if there's something going on here, and if this whole setup that Eddie Hearn and Sky Sports have, I mean, look, without getting too controversial, you guys saw what happened to Povetkin this weekend. Have you ever seen Povetkin in that situation before? Look at the way as soon as he went down, just look at how his whole entire body crumbled from that knockdown. That wasn't just a punch to the face, guys. That was like being hit with a fucking hammer. I'm not even kidding. If these matchroom guys are loading their gloves, then wow, that is. I'm gonna piss out. I've just realised I'm listening to what I'm saying. I'm gonna piss a lot of people off with this video, but man, I urge you guys to look into this. I'm not making this stuff up. Carl Froch has never done that before in a fight. My friend told me, and I trust this guy, okay? He's my best friend. He told me that Carl Froch left the arena and still had his gloves on while he was walking to the changing room. Why would a fighter do that? Why would a fighter keep his gloves on until all the cameras are gone? Please explain that to me. Why would a fighter, you know... I mean, people talk about Antonio Margarito, for example. When they talk about Antonio Margarito, and they say that Antonio Margarito had loaded gloves and this, that, and the other, that he was a cheat. One thing that I always point out in regards to that situation, why did Antonio Margarito take his gloves off? Because if you look at Antonio Margarito after he beat Miguel Cotto, after the fight, he took his gloves off immediately. He was celebrating. He did his post-fight interview with his wraps and all that. And there was a tear in the wrap. That was something that was suspicious about it, as you could see like a tear in one of his wraps. But if that was the case, and if he really did load his gloves and he knew about it, why would he not keep his gloves on? I mean, that would seem like the logical thing to do if you didn't want to get caught. And and let me just finish this off, because I know a lot of you guys are pissed off now. You're disliking the video. You're calling me a hater. I saw an interview with Carl Froch several years ago, which told me a lot about his character. And if I can find the interview, I might not be able to, but if I can, I'll post it at the end of this video. But if I find it at a later date, I'll post it on another video. But it was an interview with Carl Froch where he said something really disturbing. He said, I will do, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, I will do absolutely anything to achieve victory. I would even, if I could, I would cut my opponent's throat in the ring to make sure that I win. He actually said that in an interview. I remember it. I remember it clearly because it was disturbing. And if I can find the interview, I promise you guys I'll post it up. But man, I mean, Carl Froch, the guy is a real nasty individual. He really is. Trust me on that. And this is not a guy that I would put past cheating. I mean, I wouldn't put it past any fighter in the world to cheat, but a guy that makes statements like that, you know, talks about wanting to do things like that to his opponents. And you know, I can remember before the Andre Darrell fight, he was saying he was going to kill Darrell outside of the ring or something. I heard another interview like that. He was saying that, you know, he was going to really drill his fist into his head and shit like that. And, you know, in the fight, he was being very rough. He was like headlocking the guy and throwing him to the floor and hitting him behind the head and just being a real rough, nasty bastard in the ring. You know, I would not put it past this guy to load his gloves. So let me know what you guys think about this. I'll try and find as much evidence as I can. I encourage you guys to look it up for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. You know, do your own research and come to your own conclusion. So, yeah, God bless you guys. Let me know what you guys think about this, and thanks for watching.